Now look, I know what you're thinking. Misha, why the fuck would I watch a 30-minute Lissandra guide when I can just queue up for a League of Legends game and lose some LP, right? This guide isn't made for keks and giggles. I've just really been wanting to make this guide for a long ass time, and I felt like if I was gonna do it, I was gonna do it fucking in depth as shit. So sit back and watch the video like this, only like this. If you're not watching the video like this, you're not watching the video. Hi, so welcome to my Lissandra guide. In this video, I'll be going through 3 general categories, and then after that, I'll be going into the new practice mode that Riot recently released, and doing some things like combos and more in-depth things. So this guide is for players of all levels, but the first 3 categories that I'll be starting out with are runes, masteries, and summoner spells. I'll pop the shit up here. So runes, masteries, summoner spells, and then I'll be going into matchups, and then into phases of early, mid, and late game. If you want to click through them, go ahead. I'll also leave the time intervals or whatever they're called in the description. After these 3 categories, I'll be going into tips and tricks. So things including flash combos in general, which walls to hide behind for late game to flank your enemies while they're pushing a lane maybe, so you make sure that Lissandra doesn't fall off. And I'll be going over all these things in the tool mode more specifically. So if you haven't already clicked through these links and you watched up until this point, I hope you enjoyed the guide, and yeah. So to start this out, I'll be going through the runes. I generally like to run one rune page, but I'll show you different variations in case you want to change it up a little bit. I like to run 3 flat AP quints, followed by 9 flat armor yellows, 9 flat magic resist blues, and 9 flat magic penetration reds. If you feel that the enemy team has much more AP than AD, then you can go 6 HP scaling per level yellows instead of the armors, but I would keep the 3 leftover armors for the auto attack trades during lane. And if you feel that the enemy team is much more AD heavy than AP, you can change out 6 magic resist blues for scaling AP per level. Any of these 3 rune pages will work, but I recommend the first one because it's just safe and you can lock into pretty much any game with them. So for the masteries, you'll be going 0, 18, 12. Wanderer for the roaming advantage over savagery, because Lissandra after level 5ish doesn't even farm with auto attacks, and I'll show you why. Biscuits for laning phase, Merciless, Dangerous Game, Precision, and Thunderlord's Decree. Recovery for the laning advantage as well with Biscuits. Explorer to combo it with Wanderer for the roaming. Runic Armor for the increased healing on ulti. And Insight so you can spam those flash ulti plays more often. For summoner spells, you're going to want to run Flash and Teleport. I really don't think there's a substitute for either of these summoner spells on Lissandra. Obvious reasons for Flash would be moving yourself into a spot that catches enemies by surprise in a team fight, so that you can doubly multiple enemies or ulti someone specific, and placing yourself correctly as Lissandra is one of the biggest parts of making sure that Lissandra is still a useful champion late game. Teleport advantages obviously include flanking, ganking, and spanking. And I only said that because it rhymed, but if you are somehow losing lane phase, then teleport will help you to catch back up. If you're at least even at the end of lane phase, so 10 to 12 minutes, you'll be very useful for the remainder of the game. For general matchup stats, I would probably go to leagueofgraphs.com. I think this is the best website for statistical matchups. However, with everything, there is a good and a bad side, and the bad side of this is that it also takes in the players who play with Roa, so the bad players, and I won't be teaching you how to play it with Roa. So a good website other than League of Graphs is LOL Counter. This shows you people's personal opinions, and the only people that are willing to actually vote on stuff like this are players who will go and search up Lissandra counters and actually play Lissandra. So I would recommend lolcounter.com over League of Graphs if you are at least a little bit experienced on Lissandra. I'll quickly give you guys descriptions of Lissandra's abilities, the skill level up order, and then I'll explain the specifics of what to buy and when following the item build paths. If you utilize Lissandra's passive Iceborne properly, you won't be going out of mana anytime soon. Every 18 seconds Lissandra's next ability costs no mana, and the CD is reduced by 1 second whenever Lissandra CCs an enemy champion. Because 3 abilities of Lissandra's whole kit are CC, this can give enemies a false sense of safety if they see an out of mana Lissandra in her ultimate. During a big teamfight, Lissandra will usually get 3 free spellcasts off if she lands her CC on at least 3 or more targets. This can also catch off Lissandra players that don't focus on the specifics of her passive, because majority of League of Legends players believe that Lissandra's passive is only the free spell that she gets every 18 seconds, and completely forget about the cooldown reduction for her passive through CC. Lissandra's Q Ice Shard is a skill shot ability that acts kind of like an Ezreal Q, and disperses into a large AoE behind the first unit hit that deals the same amount of damage to all units within the AoE. However, only the first unit is slowed. This is your form of poke and wave clear for the early laning phase. Lissandra's W, Ring of Frost, binds nearby enemy units for 1.1 to 1.5 seconds, based on the level of W. This is actually your main form of CC, as I'll be showing you to manually ulti yourself in teamfights, because you are going to be going a Lissandra Glass Cannon build. Lissandra's E ability, Glacial Path, will be used to proc your Thunderwoods during trades in lane phase, but it's mainly a form of gap closing, and also being able to escape enemy ganks for early game. This will also lead your initiations for late game, as E has a massive range and can allow you to jump between 2 walls. Comboing this with Flash can give you a massive gap closer into a teamfight, surprising enemies which thought that they had the sides warded. Lissandra casts an Ice Claw, directed in a straight line, which slowly moves across the screen. If Lissandra presses E again, she'll spawn where the Ice Claw is currently, and the Ice Claw will stop going forward. Lissandra's ulti, Frozen Tomb, can be used one of 2 ways. Lissandra can either ulti on any champion, stunning it for 1.5 seconds, or she can use it on herself, which puts her in a kind of Zonias for 2.5 seconds, healing her for a significant amount of HP, increased by 1% for each 1% of HP that she is missing. Again, during this time, Lissandra is kind of in a Zonias stasis, so she is unable to be hit, but unable to take any action. Either way, the damage dealt is identical, and the unit that Lissandra ultis, whether it be an enemy champion or herself, starts radiating an AoE slow, which again deals the same amount of damage as to the target that Lissandra specifically ulted. The slow lasts for 3 seconds, while Lissandra's Zonia state lasts for only 2.5. During this guide, you'll mainly be ulting yourself, as you are, again, playing a Glass Cannon Lissandra build. But there are definitely situations where you want to lock down an enemy champion, such as an assassin or during a gank, to make killing them a lot easier. Combo with Lissandra's W, the enemy champion, unless they have tenacity, will be locked down for a total of 4 seconds late game. For the skill level up order, you're going to want to max Q, W, E, and then ulti whenever you can. If you're facing someone that might level 2 cheese gank you like a Lee Sin, it's better safe than sorry to level up your E instead of W at level 2. Surviving this early gank will be crucial for your team, because if you survive a gank early game especially, you give your jungler and your team opportunity to catch up a lead. For early game, you want to focus on getting Lost Chapter. Lost Chapter should be your #1 priority in laning phase as Lissandra. Focus on CSing over harassing your opponent, which you can actually do while CSing by aiming the Q through CS that you're going to last hit. If you don't have enough money first back to get Lost Chapter, aim for either another Doran's Ring for the extra lane boost, or boots, a pink ward, and some HP potions. If you don't have enough for any of these items because you died really early, or you just backed at a really inconvenient time because you were forced back with low HP or some other issue, go for a refillable potion, as I'd recommend to always during laning phase bring around 2 biscuits or 2 potions to lane phase with you, because it'll help you stay in lane longer and CS up to those items that you need for the early burst advantage on Lissandra. From Lost Chapter being your very first item every single game, you're going to have a couple of options to go from here. If there's no reason for you to rush the Morello Nomicon, such as a Vladimir mid, or a Mundo top lane or jungle, someone with really strong regeneration, or a Soraka support, something along those lines, I wouldn't recommend rushing the Morellos right after the Lost Chapter. The Morello passive is actually not as good as the Lost Chapter passive in terms of mana and spamming abilities for earlier on in the game. I would say maybe pre-level 12. Lost Chapter is much better to just keep in your inventory than finishing the Morellos. If you've gotten Negatron Cloak after your Lost Chapter, your build should stay the same for the next couple of items. The core items on Lissandra are Spell Penetration Boots, Morellos, Rabadons, and Void Staff. I would only recommend building Protobalt if you're going to build it really early, but as always, I would only recommend getting any items after the Lost Chapter. The biggest thing to look out for which Lissandra build to take is how much magic resist is on the enemy team and how much they can survive your one-shot combo. With all these builds, you're going to be going for the all-in, and at around 25 to 30 minutes, you should always be able to one-shot at least one enemy champion on the enemy team. Just know that these builds are very situational, and I hope that by the end of this guide, you'll be able to make your own combinations of items according to the ones that I've listed here. This build I would recommend if there's a lot of squishies on the enemy team and you're just going to go around one-shotting people and ending the game every 30 to 35 minutes. So for example, the support is a Soraka. The ADC isn't an ADC that builds Edge of Night early, and your mid laner is someone that you're confident being able to one-shot unless they build something like double magic resist. For example, magic resistance boots and Hex Drinker, or magic resistance boots and Negatron Cloak. The early game Snowball build goes like this. Doran's Ring into Lost Chapter, Proto Belt, which is already 10% CDR, and keep in mind for all of these builds, if you're doing 3 CDR items, one of them will always be Morello's, which has 20% CDR. So if you are running the 10% CDR by level 18 runes, keep that in mind because you're overkill on CDR. So after Protobelt, we go the tier 1 boots into finishing Morello's from the Lost Chapter, then Spell Pun boots, followed by Rabadon's Death Cap for the early burst, comboed with the Protobelt will make you very strong at this point of the game. And the last 2 items are Abyssal Scepter and Void Staff. If there are 2 or more champions on the enemy team stacking a lot of MR at this point, I would go Void Staff first into the Abyssal. Otherwise, the Abyssal will give you a lot more burst versus squishies, and that is what you're going with this build. Next build is called the Safe Lissandra build. This one builds Abyssal and Zhonya's. This build is the build that I would recommend to generally new Lissandra players, or for people that don't feel that they have the Lissandra mechanics down yet, because with the MR and armor, you're much tankier and have a lot more freedom to miss a couple of skill shots because of the fast early CDR that you have. This build does go to the 40% CDR mark, so if you're running the 10% CDR runes, again, you're going to overkill, so I would recommend switching back to the AP per level glyphs or magic resist glyphs. So how the Safe Lissandra build goes, you start with Doran's Ring, 2 potions as always. And then first back, if you don't have enough money for a Lost Chapter, again, go for a Doran's Ring in all of these builds. You're going to want to rush Lost Chapter, Abyssal, or Zhonya's, depending on which type of damage is more of a threat to you early game. Keep in mind that depending on the enemy team comp, if they only have one AP mid laner, such as Syndra, or someone's damage that you can dodge with Zhonya's use, I would get the Zhonya's. With Zhonya's, if you're facing a Syndra and you dodge the stun, it's pretty easy to Zhonya's all of Syndra's ulti damage, and then have the armor left over for the rest of our team's damage. After having Lost Chapter and Abyssal or Zhonya's, you want to buy the 300 gold tier 1 boots. At this point in the safe build, you should have Lost Chapter, boots, and Abyssal or Zhonya's. If you don't feel safe not building tier 2 boots early on, because of the less movement speed, go ahead and build the tier 2 boots now. At this point, you're going to want to get the other option. So if you've gone the Abyssal first, go for the Zhonya's. If you've gone the Zhonya's first, go for the Abyssal. After you get both Abyssal, Zhonya's, Lost Chapter, and tier 1 boots, if you haven't already gotten tier 2 boots, go for them now. Up until this point, you should have a Lost Chapter, Abyssal, Zhonya's, and tier 2 boots. Now you're going to want to finish your Morello's because at this point of the game, your Lost Chapter is definitely falling off. You should be around level 11 to 13, in which point Morello's is going to start being a lot better of an item than Lost Chapter. You'll also start getting into a lot of team fights, so the Morello passive is going to give you a lot more mana than Lost Chapter. You're going to want to go for a Rabadon's Death Cap into a Void Staff. Any more defensives after Zhonya's and Abyssal, such as Aroa, will take down your opportunity to one-shot enemies and use the true capability of Lissandra. If at the end of this build you feel that you need a Void Staff before the Rabadons because the enemy team has a lot of magic resist, go for the Void Staff. But in general, it's better to get the Rabadons before the Void Staff. The next build is going to be called the All-In Early Game build. Much riskier than the early game Snowball build, just because of the fact that the early game Snowball build does have Protobelt and a couple of items to help you farm and stay in the game if you fall behind. In this build, you will rush Luden's Echo, which if you fall behind, Luden's Echo does not give you the stats that you need to keep up in terms of spamming abilities for teamfights and prolonged skirmishes. At the end of this build, you won't even have that much CDR, so if you're feeling like running CDR glyphs, you can do it in this build. As always, you're going to want to start off with the Doran's Ring, 2 potions, go into the Lost Chapter, and then directly into a Luden's Echo. I wouldn't recommend this build if your enemy laner is going to build a Negatron Cloak first item. Without the capability of one-shotting your enemy with a simple Q Alt WEQ combo, this build is going to be pretty useless compared to the other builds. And if you do come to the situation where you aren't one-shotting your enemy mid laner after buying Luden's Echo, call on your jungle to either help you kill them, or go and roam bot or top, or even the jungle, depending on who you think is easy to kill. This build really depends on getting kills, as you're looking to snowball even harder than the first build, to a champion that can basically one-shot minimum 3 enemies on the enemy team if you perform your combo properly and place yourself in the right spot in a team fight. Now that you have a Lost Chapter and a Luden's Echo, you're going to be going into your Spell Penetration boots. These will give you the early damage burst. Because base Spell Penetration early game is much more useful than percent Spell Penetration with a Void Staff, and since you're only building this if your enemy mid laner isn't building a Negatron Cloak, you reduce your enemy mid laner's magic resist from around 35 to 40, then to 20 to 25. And for an 1100 gold item, at this point of the game, that's pretty worth it. Especially if you're just going for killing the enemy champions, which is exactly what you're doing in this build. Now that you have the Spell Penetration boots, a Lost Chapter, and a Luden's Echo, go into the Rabadon's Death Cap. After Rabadon's Death Cap, you're going to want to go into Morello and Omicron, followed by either Void Staff or Abyssal Scepter. Void Staff before Abyssal Scepter if they have a lot of magic resist, and Abyssal Scepter before Void Staff if the enemy team is already getting one shot. The next build is the lots of flash ulti combos. This build I would only recommend if there's going to be a lot of team fights and if there are a lot of team fights already happening. Comboed with your Masteries that reduce your summoner spells, you'll also be getting Lucidity Boots in this build, which will give you the 10% CDR, so again you can't run the CDR per level glyphs if you're running this build, because you'll overkill again. But you'll also be able to flash and ulti combo enemy champions more often, which might be just what you need. This build I also recommend if you have to escape a lot of ganks, escape a lot of dangerous situations, and force a lot more opportunity if the enemy team has a very strong late game team. This build isn't too bad late game because of the reduced summoner spells, but without having the spell penetration boots like the other builds, you won't have as much opportunity to one-shot. This build is kind of a safer build, but there's definitely a lot more opportunity to be had if you're an experienced Lissandra player. So this build starts out with Dorans, 2 potions, into Lost Chapter, into Tier 1 boots. After Tier 1 boots, finish your Morellos, and go straight into Lucidity boots. At this point of the game, you should have 30% CDR if you're not running CDR per level. Now, as I said before, if you want to change up your builds, feel free, but make sure that you generally calculate your CDR before you're going into the game if you are going to build something like Lucidity Boots. This might sound stupid because you think that you're changing your build in-game according to the situation, but looking at the enemy champions during champion select, you can figure a lot of things out. For example, if the enemy team has a Warwick jungle, and you're scared of getting Warwick camped and put behind, the reduced CDR and summoner spells here will help you out. With your flash going from 300 seconds to a total of 240 seconds, your flash cooldown will be brought down by a whole minute, which will give you more opportunity to fuck up. So with that whole CDR thing gone aside, now that you have your Morellos and Lucidity Boots, you're going to want to go into either a Zhonya's or an Abyssal, followed by a Rabadon's, followed by the opposite item that you got in the 3rd selection. So if you got Abyssal 3rd, go for Zhonya's 5th. If you got Zhonya's 3rd, go for Abyssal 5th. For your 6th item, go Void Staff. Always remember that if your last 2 items are Abyssal Scepter and Void Staff, you can change them around accordingly. This is a really good build if your team already has a lot of damage. For example, if you have a top lane Bruiser that's popping off, or an ADC that's popping off, this build is actually better than the other builds. Strictly because you don't have to one-shot the enemy team when you can CC them and enable your team to do a lot more work. And it's a much more well-rounded Lissandra build. Now for the last build, this is my classic Lissandra build. This is what I go for majority of my games, just because of the opportunity that it gives you. I was number 1 Lissandra NA last season, and the reason being was majority of my playstyle. I feel that my playstyle would be one of the best playstyles to play on Lissandra. What I like to do is shove out my mid lane, one-shot my mid laner if possible, but mainly focus on shoving out my mid lane and roaming with my jungler into the enemy jungle or other lanes. If my jungler can't follow up with me, solo ganking on Lissandra is completely fine. If you're caught in the river by the enemy jungler, it's very simple to get out with your WE combo. Ganking pre-6 on any champion is really good, but Lissandra has extra potential. With Lissandra's W being a very good CC, and having a very good gap closer with E, you can go over a wall and gank a lane very easily. I like to gank more than I like to win my own lane, because with all of Lissandra's abilities being AoE and CC, I feel that the earlier you take advantage of this, the earlier you can build a lead on your enemy. The reason that this build is different is because you don't build the resistances early game as you do with the other builds. There's no Zhonya's or Abyssal early game here, so you're going to want to either focus on stomping your mid laner or just surviving your mid laner. There's no in between. It's shove and poke your enemy down to death, or shove, go B, and or roam. So the build goes like this. Doran's Ring, double pots, into first back Doran's Ring and Lost Chapter. If you can afford only getting your Lost Chapter first back, do that, but make sure that you have your double Doran's Ring in this build. You're going to be going straight into Luden's Echo, into Spell Penetration Boots, finish your Morellos, get a Rabadon's Death Cap for the extra burst, into a Void Staff, and then last item you have the option of GA, Zhonya's, Abyssal, or the Andres. GA might seem really stupid to a lot of people, but if you want to play Lissandra for 400 games and get number 1 rank on NA for any amount of days, be my guest. Otherwise, take my advice. Unlike the other builds where you're buying either Abyssal or Zhonya's, you don't have any resistances up until this point of the game. Because you only have 1 item slot to fill, if there's a lot of magic damage and AD damage on the enemy team, building a GA might not be that bad of an idea. From my perspective, Zhonya's isn't the most important Lissandra item, although it is to a lot of other Lissandra players. My reasoning behind Zhonya's not being the most important Lissandra item, I think that Zhonya's is only good if you need to distract the enemy team, because when you're in the middle of the team fight, if you're invulnerable, the enemy team has to keep focus on you and get ready for you to pop out of your invulnerability. After you've popped your ulti, you go into Zhonya's, making the enemy team uncomfortable for a couple of more seconds. At this point in the game, the 70 AP that Zhonya's also gives you won't be that big of a thing. Blue Potion gives you 50 AP, and at this point of the game, you would have already gotten a couple of Blue Potions. Not only will GA increase your damage resistance for both sides, but GA is also a deterrent to enemy champions. I would bet my locking in support or fill Q virginity on the fact that everybody has at some point faced an enemy champion with a GA and simply not wanted to hit them because they have a GA. But you have to think of it both ways. They're probably thinking the exact same thing when you get that item. So you're more free to not ult yourself and peel for your team. In some senses, building the GA can actually allow you to be more useful, because being out of the invulnerability state, which doesn't allow you to take any actions as well, can give you more opportunity to help your team win the team fight or skirmish. Sorry for taking so long to speak about the GA. It's just there's a lot of people that think GA is a really stupid item, and I wanted to go ahead and prove why GA isn't such a bad item on Lissandra. A good thing to keep in mind is with all of these builds, you're always going to want to have pink ward activated on the map. If you can afford to stay mid lane and get the extra 75 gold on your first back to get a pink ward, it's worth it. Unless you're Dopa and don't need wards because you're a fucking god, or you're just in the Korean server in general, always have a pink ward on the map. Make sure to keep your pink wards in generally safe spots around the map, and your trinket wards in kind of more deep and risky areas. The longer your pink ward stays on the map, the better. In between these builds, if you ever know that there's going to be a team fight coming up soon and you have an extra 500 gold, always buy the blue potion. It is risky, and you'll lose 500 gold if nothing happens, but it does stay on for quite a bit of time, and if the opportunity does arise, the 50 AP and the true damage bonus will help you get the extra damage that you need to win a team fight, and push towers with 25 true damage on hit. Now that we've finished the main part of the guide, which build to get, and how to utilize the builds, let's get into the fun part, the tricks. I feel that this part of the guide might actually be the most important part of the guide, as half of the information that I just said is probably out of your brain already. If you want a specific build and a guide through it, I've left the links in the description. But the information that I'm about to tell you will be more interesting, and you can utilize these tricks creatively in your own way to help you break the meta and not be a useless Lissandra piece of shit. Hopefully I've built a foundation for you on how to play Lissandra, and this next session was going to be very big, like 63 tips and shit. But I've shortened it, and I made an Excel document summarizing this whole guide, including this next little section, adding on a couple more things that I couldn't really show, but I think are very important to express. The E delay. This trick you can use to trick your enemies into thinking that they're safe when they're actually not. So as you can see, my E kind of looks like it's gone there at the ending, but I cast it after the animation kind of disappears. The longer you can delay it, the better, obviously, but make sure you don't overdo it, or else you can kind of fuck up like that. So to start off the combos, I'm going to go with the simple trading combo, which is Q, W. The trick to this is basically you just cast Q before W, but you make sure that W hits them before Q. You'll know you're doing this properly when it either shows the damage on the same line, or your W damage shows up before Q. Don't forget to W somebody before you Q if you are unsure that your Q will hit them. Next combo is just pairing it with E. Again, it takes pretty much just not getting carpal tunnel. So EQW, and this will catch pretty much everybody by surprise, first off because nobody plays Lissandra, and plus because you're running full glass cannon with Thunderwood's Decree, no one really expects this crazy damage. Lissandra is all about learning how much damage you do, so you know exactly when to execute which combo. The next two combos will start with E. So the first one starts out with you cast E, and then you Q, and you press E again to get away. And the second one is you just E away, W before you finish, and then E again. All these tricks might seem very simple, but hopefully I'm making the connection faster for you than you maybe just needing to figure out after you die in a game. So yeah, this next combo is the most important combo on Lissandra. This is what makes Glass Cannon Lissandra viable at all. You'll see me doing this in every single team fight. So let's say that this is the tanky top laner, the tanky jungler, the squishy ADC or mid laner, and then there's support beside them. You're going to want to direct your E towards the ADC or mid laner, cast it again at max range, and you're going to cast your E in a way that sets you up for a flash nearby the enemy ADC. So now that I'm in this place, I'm going to flash towards the ADC, and I'm going to attempt to hit both the ADC and the support at the same time with my Q, W, and then ulti immediately afterwards. If you're doing this right, it should look very fluent, and I'll show you what that looks like right now. So you can see the enemy wouldn't really have time to react to that, whether it be CC me or flash away. Because if you do this fast enough, you'll catch them out of surprise with the flash QW ulti. So now that we finished with the actual combos themselves, I want to explain why I hide behind these specific areas most often. This area is much better than hiding behind here or here, because if the enemy mid lane is pushing, the freedom that they have is to ward this and this. This is a little bit far, and they won't ward this until maybe after they push mid lane, or they'll just ward this bush. If you're in the proper spot here, I've set up an enemy dummy here to show you that it's not visible to wards that are behind the 45-degree line right here. This is my favorite spot to hide behind if your team is pushing the enemy team's tier 1 turret, simply because if this bush is warded, which it likely may be, it'll give the enemy team a false sense of security. They won't be expecting you to E over, and because your E finishes on the other half of this wall, your E will actually give you a little bit more of an extension than it shows, and you'll be free to flash, QW ulti the enemy team, and combo as you wish. So to finish it off, I'll show you how to hit Dragon and Baron from the other side of the wall, so from a safer spot.
You can use this to help your team do Dragon and Baron from a safer spot, or you can use it to steal, hopefully, or hit enemy champions from across the wall. So if you walk around Dragon Pit, you'll see that there's 2 indents. There's one right here, and there's also one right here. And if you aim at the center of where the dragon is spawned, you'll always hit the dragon unless it's moved too far away from there and here. So Baron the spots are actually at different places, but it's the exact same idea. The difference is that the Baron ones are much harder to hit. So if you walk around the edges here, you'll see that your character indents right here and also right here. And you'll see that if I aim directly at the center of Baron, my Q will be able to hit, but if I aim a little bit above or a little bit under, it doesn't. And then the other spot is directly beside it. You'll see your character actually walks out right there. And you'll be able to do the same thing. Again, not bottom or not above. And if you're just above here on the indent itself, or on the outdent, your Q still won't hit Baron. So now the guide is finished. I'm really happy because as the thing went on, I got a little bit better and better at editing. Therefore, every single minute after the previous minute looked a lot better. So it looked like fucking trash. It was just like retardedly inconsistent. So I kept going back to fix it. Bottom line is, I put a lot of work into this to teach people how to play Lissandra. Hopefully, if you weren't here for the guide itself, you found it pretty entertaining. Maybe. And I've never really wanted to ask for a like or this and that. But smash that fucking like button or you're not going to learn Lissandra.